Hello, this is Rebecca from Seawolf Sustainability Consulting. I'm really delighted to introduce this podcast where I speak with Stephen Huyton about his experience as a finance director and beyond. This is part one of our conversation, and it's two real humans talking. Thank you for watching. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Rebecca from Seawolf Sustainability Consulting, and I'm really delighted to be joined today by Stephen. And Stephen, please introduce yourself.
Oh, good morning, Rebecca. Hello, everybody. Well, my name is Stephen Huyton. I'm currently living in the Netherlands, where I have been for more than the last 30 years. Was a finance director until recently for a Dutch company, which was taken over last year by a US corporation. And I'm now taking a sabbatical, having earned, in my opinion, a well-deserved break. And with my wife having just stopped work as a teacher after 24 years, then we're just taking the opportunity to have an extended holiday, which is something I've not had for quite a few years, having been engaged in the sale of the business for the last 3 or 4. So life's taking a bit of a relaxing role at the moment. But I was the finance director of my company and the joint managing director for more than 30 years. And in that role, I've been privileged to have plenty of experience in business, but with a finance background. Across many European countries, specifically the Netherlands and Germany and France and Poland and of course the United Kingdom, which has given me a great experience and one that I've thoroughly enjoyed over the last 30 years.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the introduction. And we caught up probably a month or so ago and in the Netherlands. So it's great to hear more about your background, and yeah, thank you for that introduction. And I think some people have an idea of what being a finance director means, but maybe you could explain just a little bit more about that role and what that was like for you, that experience. How did it look and feel?
Well, perhaps it's good to just go back to starters, because I actually trained as a chartered accountant in the UK. I'm a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales. That's my background. So actually I trained as an auditor. And that's how I ended up here in the Netherlands, because my client was Thermopatch, the company that I was the director of. And they asked me to come over here and join as the first finance director. So being a big European enthusiast, it didn't take much convincing to get me to come over. In the role as a finance director, gosh, well, it can encompass a huge variety of roles. It largely depends upon what size of business. I've been fortunate, in my opinion, to work in a mid-cap company. And in that role, finance director is far more than simply turning out numbers. Finance director is very much engaged in the strategic management of the business, and of course, because it's a small company, your decisions have a very direct and very quick impact upon the business, and therefore you can see the results of your labours, positive or negative, very quickly, and you feel very responsible for the business, and therefore you're engaged really more than just simply in producing the annual accounts or the monthly reports or the weekly sales figures or whatever might be the requirement. So it's a very much broader role than simply the finance role. That's been my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sharing a little bit from my side too, that was certainly my experience working in finance departments, often from very large organizations, but could be really varied. And it was, of course, the numbers and preparing the financial statements and all those things, but lots of other things in between. And picking up a little bit on your experience and from an audit background. I'm sure many people may have an audit background, then through to being a finance director. Did you see much evolution of finance functions, departments, sort of during that time, or the role? How did that evolve, if it did?
Well, I did. If you start with the audit side, I mean, when I was an auditor, training and qualified, understanding the business was very important. We didn't have the benefit of data programming, data programs which interrogated the data of the business. We didn't have the benefits of AI now, which is obviously fresh on the scene and will add yet more. It helps in some ways to add more insight to companies. So you had to rely far more on your understanding of the business, and that's my background. You know, that's where I started. I can remember the partner at the beginning of my time as an accountant saying to me, you know, the very first thing you do on an audit is go and sit in front of the managing director and ask him or her about the business. And that would dictate how your audit went, because if you didn't trust what they told you, or if you weren't keen, enthusiastic about the way they spoke about their business, then it dictated the way you looked at the business. And that's something that I've carried through into my finance role: the importance of understanding the company, so that you really understand what happens on the shop floor. Our company is a production company. And makes real things, which is what a lot of companies don't seem to do nowadays, but it makes real things. And therefore understanding actually what that means in practice helps you interpret the finance numbers far better, and helps you manage the company far better. I think the finance role has changed over the years as the finance industry has itself evolved. I think the biggest change that I've seen is financing support from the banks. A lot of mid-cap companies relied upon the banks for finance, and they have over the years become far more conservative, far more focused on simply the numbers game. They've de-skilled the whole middle management of managers and taken away whole layers of management. So that nowadays you don't even have a manager, so you've got nobody to build a relationship with. When I started with my company in the Netherlands, I had a business relationship manager, and as I finished, you were part of a department, and every time you phoned up, you got somebody new who were clueless about the business, and even answering and solving simple problems became a bureaucracy. And I think that's something people find in their private financing affairs. When you need to phone the bank nowadays, you're stuck in a big queue, and then the person you speak to has no idea about what you're talking about. So, and that's one of the big changes: this depersonalization in finance, driven by the need for profit, and so the finance function has become very impersonal from a company perspective. And then on the other side, big growth in private equity, who've stepped in and replaced banks in a lot of cases. But again, they're driven by numbers, and often they get involved in companies. They think they bring skill sets to the table, which they do, undoubtedly, and they help companies in their expansion. But they're also just often driven by the numbers game, and that communication process is quite challenging. So the finance director's role has become far more focused on effective communicating to third parties, to stakeholders, to shareholders. So that's what I've witnessed in the changes over the last years.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. So it's both the sort of finance director's role, and then also the people organizations are interacting with, including banks, finance providers who are changing as well. And again, I'm sort of paraphrasing, but it feels like technology could be one of the drivers, as well as cost pressures and reducing costs and economies of scale and all those sorts of things. But you mentioned the word trust, and it feels that's a really important element, whichever way things are being organized, maintaining trust. And yeah, it's maybe even more tricky when things are less personal.
It's very tricky because the word trust doesn't exist, does it? If you're talking to a computer, which you often are, then trust in you is not the issue. It's whether your numbers make sense. When you had a relationship with the bank, then he or she trusted your judgments, and I place great value in that. The old-fashioned almost handshake and my honor is my word is my honor sort of situation that was 30, 40 years ago, generation ago. That's really gone out of the window, and with it the word trust. So that everybody relies now on if it's the statutory accounting or the reporting or the financials, and I think that is now one of the problems that we face as we go forward, because we've moved from being in the finance function. I think particularly when you look at third parties and audits, they used to have the phrase that I grew up with was always about true and fair. Do the accounts reflect the fair view? And that's been replaced now by box ticking. And the problem with that is that it brings into question all too easily whether or not the accounts actually disclose the true situation of the company, which makes it very difficult for people who don't have your financial background to understand. Can they place confidence in the numbers?
Yeah, indeed. And I think that true and fair is something I always think of, even really to this day, almost daily, particularly with sustainability, because I think there are organisations who greenwash, and that's one of the questions I often ask myself: Does this disclosure or this product or this label, does it really reflect a true and fair view, or is it marketing? That might be something else. But I think it's a really important question to think about, particularly with sustainability reporting.
Well, you picked on an example there, haven't you? Because you talked about, what they call ESG reporting.
Yes.
And you get into this area where we talked about this, and we know both about the subject. That ESG reporting has suffered certainly in the last year, and certainly in the last 6 months with the change of presidents in the US. But the principal point was that it was supposed to be about enhancing. It was part of the enhancing of trust, I think, in the company, about what they were doing, not just trust in the numbers, but what they were doing as a company. What was their moral compass? And ESG reporting was a way of perhaps encapsulating and including in the annual reporting, the company's moral compass that the company showed, in its areas. And the whole purpose of it was to get companies, at least in my view, engaged in being more aware of their environment, more than just simply looking at return on shareholder funds, but how they impacted upon the environment around them, their stakeholders, the people that work for them, the environment in which they lived, the communities in which they operated, the clients, the suppliers, the whole gambit. That was supposed to be the backdrop towards the benefits of what the ESG reporting was about. I think the problem has been that particularly for bigger companies, has been seen as being another necessary tick box at the annual report. Some companies have taken it on with enthusiasm, and some companies you saw taking it on with enthusiasm. But you see how quickly that enthusiasm seems to have evaporated in the light of political pressure in the last 6 months in particular, and the clock seems to have been reversed. And I think that ESG reporting now is under a serious pressure. It falls under the woke title, doesn't it, a little bit, as being what should be seen as being the right thing to do, but for the wrong reasons. And nowadays, I think that the challenge for people who are enthusiastic is to stop the tide from from turning as much as it seems to be at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I share a similar view, of course, but I think it does come back to that transparency. The purpose was, well, firstly, to understand your risks and opportunities and have that more holistic view and stakeholders, as you mentioned, but also to provide transparency, which can help build trust. And I was just thinking, actually, it's a bit of a tangent, but again, I was thinking of the trust equation, which is, got to try and remember now, I think reliability plus credibility plus intimacy divided by self-interest. And that reliability and credibility, that is about having not only your ESG reporting, but also your financial reporting, it being correct, having audits, having assurance, being transparent, having that true and fair picture. The intimacy piece, that's, as you mentioned about the banks, it's about maybe having another human there who and you can talk to, as opposed to perhaps a small AI chatbot. It's quite hard perhaps to build intimacy when it's something more technology based. So yeah, I think it can, if it's done well, really help to build trust. But unfortunately, with that equation, it feels like some pieces aren't working quite so effectively at the moment. I'll be diplomatic.
I think that's very true.
And I wanted, again, sort of thinking of your experience and recent experience to mention some of the takeaways and reflections and sort of technology and some of the areas which could be improved. Are there areas from your experience you think maybe there were some really positive developments or takeaways during that time, during your career? So both sort of maybe areas for improvement and good things that you saw during that time.
Oh, I think there's been lots of improvements. I mean, one of the things that I think is the biggest change is that when I graduated a long time ago, won't say how long, but a long time ago, accounting, when you did the bookkeeping, unless you were a very big company, it was still a manual exercise. I remember doing an audit and going up to a client in the Lake District, and she still wrote in a copper with an ink pen in a huge book, and that's how she did her bookkeeping. But I have to say, it balanced to the penny. I never ever found a single mistake, but I couldn't read her writing because it was written in copper plate handwriting. It was absolutely stunning. And I think that we've moved on a huge way from those days. Accounting systems now, computerized accounting systems, are incredible. They are a database. They are a huge wealth of knowledge, and they've taken away, therefore, the drudgery of aspects of if you're looking at it from an auditor's perspective. And they allow the auditor, if the information is used properly, to help them understand the business and help the client to manage the business better by providing a periodic sense check about how the business is progressing. And sometimes you need that. It doesn't matter how big a company you are. The audit role, if it's done properly, can definitely help provide a sense check about the direction of the business and so on. From the finance director's perspective, it's had an enormous impact, because so long as, and I think it's critical, that finance directors understand how the business works. I see too many finance directors who are totally reliant upon the numbers. What were the sales were yesterday, what the shipments were, what the cash take was from the day before. And that purely numbers-driven exercise demonstrates for me a lack of understanding for the business. But with the benefits now of AI, interrogating the data, and there's such huge amounts of data available, can help improve understanding of the business and change management of the business for the better. Because the thing that has concerned me on the negative side is that over the years, we've seemed to have become more focused on short-termism. The finance function has become a short-termism. It's either a question about what's next week, tomorrow, next week, certainly the next quarter. And if you're a publicly financed company, a publicly quoted company, then it's always about, the next quarter results and the next call with the broker and the next public statements and the stock market reports and so on. And that short-termism is driving decision making. And I think that is negative. That's really negative, because we live in a world where decision making, in fact, you might argue, should be longer term, and yet the finance function in some cases is driving us to making shorter term decisions. Having returns on capital which require a return within 3 to 4 years in some industries is just patently unrealistic. And it distorts the whole way the business is run, and that, I think, is a negative. On the one hand, big positives, but on the other hand, you have to say that at the moment we seem to be driving down the road more and more to short-termism.
Thank you for watching part 1. It was such a pleasure to talk to Stephen and hear from him. I really enjoyed it. Now for part 2 will be something a little bit different, of course, in hearing Stephen's insights, but in a slightly different method, because I've used some AI to generate the video. Thank you. See you. Bye.